Welcome to today's Savant Live webinar. My name is Joel Cundick. I'm a financial advisor in Savant's McLean, Virginia office, and I'm joined today by my fellow financial advisor, Bob Witt, who's in Illinois. So we're glad to be with you today. We're going to talk about planning for your first paycheck. And we understand that people who are joining this webinar are going to be at several different stages. Maybe you've already started retirement, so you're planning your 5th or 10th or 20th, and you're just trying to make sure you got it right. Maybe retirement's 1 month away from you, and maybe retirement's 2 or 3 years away. What I'd love to be able to do, if possible, is get mistakes made on paper before they're made in real life. So one of the subjects of today is going to be determining that question of, can I retire? Am I ready? Is this something that I can do? And I think of it like a pre-mortem, right? You're planning in advance to make sure you get things right so that you're not looking back saying, wow, I wish I would have done things differently. So congratulations to all of you to be on here today. It means you're forward thinking, you're trying to plan as best you can here. So to launch off, we're going to post an image that has a lot of questions on it. And if I could articulate what that really gets to is the uncertainty of retirement. We have no way of knowing what is coming down the pike ultimately, right? How much can I spend for my portfolio? How long am I going to live, right? How am I going to pay for what needs to be covered? I know I have Social Security. How much is that really going to cover? Is Medicare going to cover my healthcare expenses? How much is inflation going to be in retirement? And how are returns going to look? Are they going to be better than the past, worse than the past? And then what am I going to spend? So we're going to focus today on the things, number one, that you can drill in on a little bit more narrow. You know how much you're going to have. You know how much maybe you're going to need. And then bridging the two is where we do definitely get to uncertainty, but there's a lot we can do to answer a number of these questions for you, or at least to mitigate risk, to have it where you don't have a realistic concern of running out of money. I can't help you get rid of the concern altogether, right? Because some things just stick with us. But one of the things I found for people I've helped retire is that the first couple months, 3 months are the hardest, where as long as you've done everything right, and there's still that nugget of concern. Once you see that 2 or 3 months in, your portfolio hasn't gone to zero, right? Taking out that monthly amount is not really having too huge an initial impact on it. That can really kind of help allay fears largely. So there is hope, right? As long as you've done your advanced planning to get things right. So what we want to evaluate first, if we're planning for that first paycheck, is what do I have? All right. What are my resources? All right. What are my assets? So we're going to look at bank accounts, the amounts of personal savings. We're going to look at what do we have saved in retirement plans, maybe my current employer and past employers, if I've got a number of legacy plans that are still in existence. I'm going to look at other investments that I have, brokerage accounts, a business. Do I own a business? Am I planning for a sale of that business? Is it a reasonable sale price that I've determined for that business? I'm trying to get to my resources. Have I gone to socialsecurity.gov to get the most recent statement of what my earnings will be in retirement? If you haven't done that in the last couple of years, you'll want to do that, especially because there have been large inflation adjustments to Social Security income over the last couple of years. So the number you think you might be getting from Social Security may not match with what the statement now says you're going to get. Are you going to receive a pension? If you're going to receive a pension, do you know that you want to take that as a monthly stream of income? Or is that something you might want to take the lump sum and roll over to an IRA? There's some question there and some evaluation. Are you thinking of working in retirement? So is there going to be some form of income stream in the early years? We have one of our advisors, Rob Morrison, wrote a great book on that called Victory Lap Retirement, right? The idea of that you're going to still continue doing the favorite things that you like to do and kind of hand off all the things you didn't like to do. And it can act as a great bridge to retirement. We can talk more in depth there at another time. Also, are you going to have rental income, right? Do you have some kind of real estate that you're going to be renting out? And are you comfortable with that, what you're going to be able to charge for that and what you're going to have to set in reserve for potential expenses? So once I know what my resources are, all right, I categorize that into a net worth statement. Now I can go into say, well, what do I need? And this is, man, we put the word budget at the beginning of this. It's just not fun for people to take a look at, right? Oh, I never wanted to do that anyway. Let me give you a couple of shortcuts, all right? If you have a pretty good sense of what is going out each month, by that, what I mean is what is being spent from your bank account and what is being spent from your credit card account. That might give you the thumbnail to then do these quick evaluations, all right? It works out fine unless when you back into things, you realize, oh, I've been spending $10,000 a month from my bank accounts added to my credit card balances. And what I'm going to be able to live on in retirement is $9,000 a month. If you need to make adjustments, this is where this budget worksheet, which this is not by any means intended to be a comprehensive example here, we can definitely send you a budget template if you're looking for that. That's going to help you narrow down to, all right, what of these expenses can go away in retirement? What you don't want to do is think, oh, when I retire, I'm sure I'm going to spend a lot less. Because actually what you're going to have is more time to fill that you didn't have before. You may say that car maintenance expenses will go down a bit if you're not driving as far to commute. Are we all really commuting as much these days anyway? Is your wardrobe expense going to go down? Okay, maybe. But a lot of other things are not going to go away at retirement, right? So in fact, you're going to have more time. You're going to put that into hobbies. Hopefully, you're going to do things that you enjoy doing. You're not going to be watching CNBC all day. But what we want to do is get clear on how much would I like to be able to spend per month in retirement. So once I have my resources determined, and once I have a number that tells me what I think I would like to be able to spend in retirement, now I have to build a comparison of the two, all right? Now I have to say, all right, here's my goal for what I think I want to spend. Again, can't be better for this to happen 2 or 3 years before you retire. Because if you can do this before you flip the switch on retirement, and there are adjustments you'd like to make, you're going to be able to have time to do that. I talk with my clients about having stakes in the ground, right? What are the things that matter most about retirement? For some, it's, hey, I have to retire at age 65. You tell me what I can live on, but I have to stop working at age 65. And for others, they'll say something more like, hey, from these numbers I've worked out, my goal for consumption is $8,000, $9,000, $10,000 a month. And that's the number that really matters. I'll work an extra couple of years if I need to, but I really want that monthly amount of money to come to me. Any of those answers is fine. You have to decide what's right for you. And once you have decided what's right, this is now where we're getting to a lot of points of uncertainty. What is inflation going to be? What are returns going to look like? And that's going to drive how much I can spend. So let's look at a hypothetical scenario here. Let's say we've got a couple age 65. They're looking to have a 30-year retirement. They think we want to plan for us both living to age 95. And their portfolio is at $1 million. All right, that was step one, determine your resources. We've got $1 million in the portfolio. Now we've evaluated things. This couple has said, I need to be able to spend $10,000 a month or $120,000 per year. They're going to have fixed income sources, meaning it could be pension, could be Social Security, all right, could be rental income. But what I know is I'm going to get $68,000 a year from those sources. Well, what's my need then? It's the difference between the two. $52,000 a year is going to need to come out from the portfolio. You've noticed something that we haven't covered in here yet that is an important factor is taxes. It's a very different portfolio if it's $1 million all in a taxable brokerage account than it is if it's $1 million all in an IRA. They have different tax implications. We'll talk about that later on. But for now, we're just getting to a baseline of what do I need and what is the delta between what I need and what I'm already going to be getting from fixed income sources, all right? When I do that, now I'm going to say, all right, what is the withdrawal rate I can take from my portfolio? And that's going to be different for different people. I'd love to say that there's just a single number, but many of you might have heard the 4% rule. That was drafted by Bill Bengen in the Journal of Financial Planning in 1992. So almost exactly 30 years ago. That Bill Bengen posited that. He's still around. He's still doing research. He's now saying that maybe 4.5% is more appropriate given certain circumstances. But what I know from working with individual clients is it really depends on your life situation and what you're wanting to accomplish. So if you're 55 and looking to retire versus being 70 and looking to retire, I know there's going to be a very different withdrawal rate. You don't want to go with the rule of thumb that was published in a journal, all right? Depends on what your expenses are, and then that last bullet on their asset allocation. What amount of money are you comfortable having in stocks? And that's something that Bob's going to cover a little bit more in detail later on, how important it is to have multiple buckets. But you want to know about yourself. Hey, what is the level of portfolio that I'm going to abandon if things go bad? That's the level I don't want to go to in stocks, right? Because what we want is to build a diversified portfolio that we're going to be able to live on throughout retirement. But that's going to have implications for how much you can spend. If you need to have more in defensive assets, it's going to lower your return and you need to have a lower spend rate. So how are we going to throw all of this together? It used to be that financial planning industry used a straight line in income return coming to you throughout retirement. We don't do that anymore as an industry, okay? The reasoning is, well, we know that's not going to happen. Whatever happens in retirement, it is not going to be a straight 6% per year every year through retirement. So then we kind of looked at that and said, all right, what's a better way? We're proud at the McLean office to have the founder of the Monte Carlo simulation strategy be a predecessor of us. Years ago, Lynn Hopewell in the 1990s first applied Monte Carlo simulation to financial planning, and it's now the accepted standard throughout the industry. So we're trying to get to a confidence zone. What do I mean by that? Well, we're going to randomly generate 1,000 different scenarios of retirement. How are we going to do that? Well, we're in essence going to roll the dice according to probabilities, with the mean probability being the most likely. Let's say that's 7% for you. And as you get farther and farther out, less and less probable, but still statistically possible. We're going to randomly generate those returns, and we're going to determine in how many of those scenarios am I going to have money left over at the end? Have I never gone to zero? And this graphic here that we have is very good articulation. The greens are all the plans that finished above zero. The reds are the plans that didn't. This is not a test that you want to get a 100% on. It tends to be that in Monte Carlo simulation, the worst 5% of scenarios are worse than the Great Depression. So we want to have some reasonableness tests applied to this. We'd like to see anywhere between 75 and 85, maybe 90%. That is our confidence zone. If I get below 75% in results, that means that more than 250 of the scenarios ended at zero before you made it to age 95. And that's too much uncertainty. There's too realistic of outcomes that are out there that could take you to zero. And we don't want that to happen. Now, if we get above 85, some people say 90%, but in that zone, we get certainly above 90%. Well, now we're planning for scenarios that are highly improbable. And if they were to occur, you would likely to be making changes anyway. I looked at most of my retirees that I've helped in 2008 financial crisis, and in 2020, and in 2022, right? So in all of these shocks, and one of the things that comes out consistently is that people tend to want to spend less. They're not going to be going on a big trip in the middle of a financial crisis. They're not going to be making a big car purchase. So naturally, there's a tendency to tighten the belt, right, for everyone in those tight times. Well, if you're going to be making adjustments anyway to your plan, why would I want to build a plan that plans on you spending the same monthly amount throughout retirement? All right, so we're going to build that stress test. There's some other factors that a good financial advisor is going to build into that. That's all going to happen behind the scenes, but it matters. What are the taxes going to be in retirement, right? What is inflation going to be? What are reasonable assumptions there? What's a reasonable forward-looking return assumption? If you use a software on the internet, all of those are just going to kind of look back in time and forward track that into the future. And we think it's really important that we get a little bit more nuance and put a good set of magnifying glasses on what is inflation going to be, what is return going to look like potentially, right? And another thing that we're going to want to look at is what's unique to you. For example, I don't want to tell somebody that they're going to be able to spend the same amount all the way through retirement, when in my 15 plus years of being a financial advisor, I've seen that people in their early 80s tend to spend less. They're not saying anymore, hey, we're going to go visit the grandkids. They're saying, hey, why don't the grandkids come to us, for example, right? So what we want to do is build in the reality as best we can into those models to get you the best possible output to help you evaluate, is this really going to be a plan that works or not? So at the end of the day, what the Monte Carlo simulation is going to do is it's going to take your resources, it's going to compare it against your planned spend and tell you whether it's successful or not. Now, if it's coming out at 74%, for example, here, which is to us is below a confidence zone. Now we're going to look at, well, what can we change? And I can tell you there's a number of levers we can pull to make those adjustments. But at the end of the day, it's what matters most to you that's going to be to tell us which lever we need to move, right? If I say, well, everything works better if you retire 1 year later, and you come back and say, yeah, that is not going to happen. I need to retire now. Well, let's adjust some basic living expenses and see, would you be comfortable living on a little bit less? And you can see in this scenario, for example, just a change from $120,000 a year to $110,000 a year, that's a little under $1,000 a month difference, took the probability of success from 74% to 90%. Those are the kinds of tweaks we're looking to make to a potential forward-looking retirement to get you into that confidence zone so that you can feel comfortable that, yeah, this looks like it should work for retirement goals, okay? What we're trying to do here, just to bring you back to what we're going to, make the mistakes on paper. Plan this out before. Do this 2, 3, 4 years before you're thinking of retiring. Or let's say you're thinking of retiring in 3 months and you're looking for, a second opinion. Is this all going to work? I think it works. I'm about to submit my notice. And running an exercise like this can be a very effective tool to have you feel much more confident about the decision you're about to make. Okay. So Bob's now going to help us talk about, what to do to make that paycheck go as far as it can.
Well, I think you hit on some really sound, fundamental ways to start. Putting pen to paper, evaluating the risks, and then doing some stress testing can take many, many hours. It can take months, perhaps, in some instances, to get this right. As you said, you don't want to go into retirement with any doubts in your mind. So now our shift, once we've determined what the levers and dials are and that we feel comfortable, our focus shifts to strategy and implementation and managing the different sources of income you'll receive over time. So it's not only about making sure the assumptions we used in our plan for things like risk and return match. Hopefully they match with the types of investments that we're going to select, but also having that understanding that the percent you withdraw from your portfolio will change constantly, and how we manage that is extremely important. Monte Carlo goes a certain way to that extent, but we have to have an expectation that that's going to happen. And that's what we want to talk about next, is how do we manage this in a way we don't make rash, unnecessary changes when things don't go as well for us, because we know that occasionally can happen in the short run. But then also, how does the money actually get from the portfolio into my checkbook? Logistically, how is this going to happen? Is it going to happen on the 1st of the month, the 15th of the month? And how am I to manage this? I think what you pointed out here when you're talking about Monte Carlo returns, that's worth mentioning, is they don't happen our returns don't happen in a straight line. Return disparities early on can either get us ahead when we have outsized returns, or behind when we have market corrections, compared to what the straight line Excel spreadsheet that some of us like to depict on our computers, right? We have people come into our office and say, here's my retirement on a spreadsheet. I say, bring this thing back a year from now, and it's going to be completely different, because you're not going to get the rate of return that you've inputted in your spreadsheet. And I think what's important to know is that it's not severe disparities in the first year or two. So if you get into retirement and you have a hiccup or two, i.e. retired in 2020, that's typically not that bad of a scenario. For example, if I retired in 1987, a day before the market crashed, almost 22% in one day. By the end of the year, I actually had more money in my account than I had at the beginning. So we have to think about this not in terms of bad years, but bad multi-year periods, bad decades, bad stretches of returns. So what I'm saying is that most of us still need to have that growth in our portfolio to achieve the return that our plan says we need to keep pace with inflation, but we also have to keep on top of it and manage it. So I think this is a good time to discuss silver bullets. They don't exist. There's no one strategy that's going to work for everybody in every situation. Oftentimes it's going to be pulling together many different diversifying strategies. If you really boil things down, there are only 4 sources of return available to us as investors. It doesn't matter as much about the product or strategy. It's just really looking at how I combine these different four sources of return. The first is interest. And we know we get these from things like CDs, T-bills, bonds, perhaps some sorts of annuities. From stocks, we get things like dividends and capital appreciation. And then finally, most of us are going to spend down some of our capital in the form of taking back principal. That's it. Show me any solution and I can break it down that simply. Now, how much you put towards each of these sources of return are going to be one of the most important factors in how your retirement turns out. And I think for many of us, we're going to need to commit some dollars towards longer term assets, as scary as that can be in the short run. But I think it's important sometimes to look at and not lose sight of the simplicity of the math of it, really. And that, let's just remind our audience and one another about the power of compounding. This is a simple chart. It goes back to 1926 that shows 5 different asset classes: inflation, treasury bills, long-term government bonds, large cap stocks, and small cap stocks. We have close to 100 years of history on this slide, and we look at inflation, historically averaging close to 3%. How do things that produce interest stack up? Look at T-bills. T-bills, if you invested $1 almost 100 years ago in T-bills, you had averaged around 3.2%, which means your dollar would have grown to $22, just barely keeping pace with inflation. Now, if I told you that stocks average more than 3 times that return, what do you think a dollar would have grown to if I invested in some of the largest, most well-run companies in the world, if I invested in large stocks? People are sometimes shocked by this, but that same dollar over that same period of time would have grown to over $11,535. That is the power of compounding. That's the commitment that some of us will need to keep pace with inflation. If we invest in something a little bit more aggressive than these well-run large companies in the world, smaller companies, our dollar grows to almost $49,000 just by getting about a 2% difference. Here's the issue though, Joel, as you know, and as advisors, we see this all the time. Most of us don't want to experience that ride that investment, that growth-oriented investment puts us on to get that higher return. Here's the S&P 500, just at a simple example over the last 25 years. Somebody retiring in 1996, you immediately experience a big increase in your portfolio and thoughts start to come into your head. Joel, they come back to you and say, you know, we never talked about that second home, but is that possible? Can we help our grandkids fund their college? And then, of course, we know what happened for many of us back in the 2000s, the early 2000s. As soon as you're feeling like you've licked it, bang, your portfolio not only loses value, but it's less than what you first started. You're considering maybe selling that second home now. And how do you break the news to your grandchild? You can't help them with their college education. So the trend continues, this up and down. How do we get off this roller coaster? And what we find valuable is to see your portfolio differently in retirement. You have to break your portfolio and your retirement plan into segments of time, which will allow you to manage the money differently. I think better in buckets. For most investors, however, for all the years leading up to retirement, we think of our portfolio as just one portfolio. That's what we've been taught for all of our working years. You're used to making decisions based upon risk and return and managing the asset allocation, rebalancing back to some targets. I call this accumulation logic, where the mental approach and the execution in retirement becomes very different. In retirement, we want you to break apart the portfolio into the time frame it supports. You remember the 4 sources of return. This is where they become relevant. The first bucket is the income bucket. It's comprised of things like cash, CDs, bonds that generate interest to support our retirement paycheck. We're actually going to pay that interest down into an account, which eventually gets to your checkbook. Now, unfortunately, as we all know, until recently, interest has really almost been virtually non-existent. It's only until the last year or so we're seeing more return in the form of interest. No matter, as Joel, you described, depending upon how much you have and how much you're going to take, many of us will not be able to live on interest alone. And so that's where the growth bucket comes in. it provides that second source of return, dividends. And just like interest, we're going to pay those dividends down into the account that will eventually end up in your monthly paycheck. I think it's important to note, as we see a lot of retirees consider this, overweighting dividends, that's just one component of the growth bucket. The more important component of the growth bucket is actually capital appreciation. Over the last 50 years, historically, if you look back on very large US large companies, stocks on average have produced almost 70% of the return in the form of capital appreciation and about 30% in the form of dividends. But it's the capital appreciation that causes that stomachache, that volatility. And so what's important about this growth bucket, in addition to providing dividends and capital appreciation, is don't sell it. Don't sell it at inopportune times. Allow it to grow. Selling at the wrong time can be detrimental. The source of the higher return is the volatility. And if that bucket shrinks, and it will, there's going to be times in which we face crises like we did recently in 2020. We have to give this bucket as much time as possible. And when it's not cooperating, then you'll have safer assets to draw on in that income bucket to provide the final source of return, which is principal. So using that same example that Joel used of $1 million and the couple needing $52,000 from their portfolio, they already had $68,000 of income. We want to stretch out as much as possible away from that growth bucket, give that time to work. And so if we looked at this, a very simple way is to say, create a buffer. We'll start typically with a 7-year buffer. So very simply, if I needed $52,000 a year, and I'm not inflating this for ease of this example, for the first 7 years, I'd put around $364,000 in my income bucket. And that typically gives us enough time to allow that growth bucket to work, right? So the balance then of my assets that I need for timeframes 7 years and beyond are going to be placed in something that's going to get me that higher expected return. What you'll notice there is those two numbers are about 60% stock, 40% bonds, a pretty classic retiree portfolio. Some of us might need to make that 7-year segment much shorter because we need to get a higher return, or perhaps we're a little bit more palatable to the volatility that stocks cause. And then some of us might have more assets and maybe not have to draw as much, and we feel a little bit more secure creating a longer term buffer. So it's okay to take it from 7 years and make it smaller or make it longer. But really what this becomes is not only a practical way to do it and how to get your money into your paycheck, into your checkbook so you can spend it, but setting up your portfolio in this fashion, we find to be a great way for you to continue to feel comfortable holding these more volatile assets like stocks. So some people refer this as buckets. Some practitioners refer to it as a time segmented approach. We like it because it takes away the emotion, helps you stay invested. So I know I said a lot there. Joel, I'm going to kick it over to you now, because as important it is as getting all of the information lined up on paper and then creating a plan to execute on the assets, there are other ways to make your portfolio and your income last longer, and that's keeping the IRS out of your pocket. So I want to kick it back over to you to talk a little bit about how to withdraw from your portfolio in the most efficient way.
That's right. Thanks, Bob. And I will put a moment here to just say we do have a Q&A box. Once I'm going to be done talking in this section, we're going to be answering a few questions you have. Whatever we have time for in the call, we may be answering later individually to you, and I'll tell you how to do that. But as I think about what Bob's outlining for you there, is that throughout retirement, it is going to matter which assets you draw from at which time, right? And that really is a consistent need throughout. You're gonna have to decide in up markets, where should the money come from? In down markets, where should the money come from? Well, the other thing you have to decide is not just which asset type, but also which account type. Now, some of you on this call today are going to have everything in a tax-deferred 401k. And if that's the one vehicle that you have, everything will need to come from that account. But for many of you on the call today, you are going to have brokerage accounts, bank accounts, both fall in that taxable bucket there. You have tax deferred accounts, it's traditional IRAs and 401ks, and tax-free accounts, which would be Roth IRAs, Roth 401ks. So where should the money come from in retirement? Now, the conventional wisdom is going to say to you, oh, that's super easy. You want to pay as little taxes as possible. If you take money out of that tax deferred account, that's just going to kill you on taxes. So why don't you take everything out of the taxable account? Well, in year 2023, that seems like that's going to make a whole lot of sense because I'm going to pay the least taxes possible in 2023. But if we look at it through a 30-year retirement, if we take everything out from the taxable account first, that can create a lot of problems for us tax-wise down the road. So we want to think of the whole retirement and say it's not going to come first from taxable, then from tax deferred, then from tax-free. We're going to say actually that it can make sense to do a blend of taxable and tax deferred in the early years of retirement in particular. All right. So we want to make sure we're evaluating that personally for us to get things right. Now, what we really want to do then is look at our brackets. And I know this isn't fun, right? Nobody wants to dig into the tax table. But there are some really important numbers in that tax table to be aware of, and they do change every year. The two biggest inflection points happen between that 12% and 22% bracket, which is over $45,000 if you're single, over $90,000 if you're married. You jump by 10%. All income above that point is taxed an extra 10%. And the next inflection point is $182,000 if you're single, or $364,000 if you're married filing joint. You jump from 24 to 32%. So a lot of our retirees are going to be in that 22 to 24% range, but we definitely want to stay out of the 32% range. If we can be down to the 12% range, that'd be great, but let's make sure that's not at the expense of a future self. There's still room to play though between that 22 and 24. I'd rather not expose myself to 24% tax if I can avoid it and keep myself in the 22 bucket. All right. How am I going to do that? Well, I'm going to do that by designing a strategy that thinks of when is Social Security going to come out? How much am I then going to take from a traditional IRA to get that tax bracket right? And then the remainder is going to come from my Roth, if I'd like to, but probably from my taxable brokerage account. The Roth money is really good to leave as long as you can, generally. So we can actually compare that. And it's going to be different for every individual. This is a sample scenario in which somebody starts, in that $1.4 million range of retirement savings. And they're either going to spend from their IRA first, which is the blue curve. They're going to spend from their brokerage first, which is the gold, or they're going to do a split withdrawal strategy, which you can see some's coming from traditional and some's coming from brokerage. And that gray line stays above the blue and gold lines all throughout retirement. It means you could do a better job if you tax plan for multiple years instead of a single year. You could end up with opposite results. But since we know you're going to live for a long time, let's take the numbers that we think we have an idea of what tax rates are going to be in the future and apply that to your spending strategy. All right. Now, it's not just going to be in spending that we're going to try and get things right. We're also going to potentially try and get things right with Roth conversions in the early years of retirement. So when you're in your mid 60s to your early 70s, they've moved that required minimum distribution age back and back. It was at 70 and a half. It's now gone to 73. In another decade or so, it's going to be up to 75. That really gives us a number of years before you're required to take money out of a traditional IRA, where you would say, yeah, I've got enough to live on. I don't need to take any from the traditional IRA. And we'd say, well, what if we could soak up the rest of that 12% bracket or the rest of that 22% bracket, even if you're in that appropriate point, with taking money out of the traditional IRA and moving it over to a Roth IRA. That's called a Roth conversion. Now, when you do that, you have to pay the income taxes out of pocket to convert the full amount. But the really powerful thing is that before you won't be able to do this once you're required minimum distribution age, right? You're going to have to take money out of the IRA then. But if I can lower the balance of the IRA in years where I didn't have to take money out and get that over into a tax-free account to grow, it's going to help me throughout my retirement. And it's certainly going to help my heirs if I'm trying to be mindful of them in their inheritance. Because a traditional IRA inherited by heirs has to be taken out the entirety in the first 10 years, if it's your children. A Roth IRA inherited has the same need to take out in 10 years, but there's no taxes due. So you can leave the majority of it in the Roth IRA for an additional 10 years and really set them up for success. So it's not just helpful in your lifetime, it's helpful for more lifetimes. And that's our job as financial advisors, is to be thinking as big picture as we can. So you can see here, adding that partial Roth conversion strategy, that new yellow line is above the other three throughout retirement in this person's specific set of circumstances. I don't know what yours is going to be, but I want you to be mindful of, hey, don't fritter away your 60s and early 70s just drawing all from your taxable account and then kick yourself into a really high tax bracket when you have to take money out at required minimum distribution age 73. All right, there's other things we can do in advance of that to lower what we're taking out after tax. And one of the things we talk about as financial advisors at Savant is it's not return that matters. It's after tax return that matters. And that's not going to be reported on any performance statement, but it's the only number that should matter to you, because it is the real number that you are getting in performance. And it's the real number that you're living on in retirement. That's why we want to be mindful of those. One other curveball that I want to throw in there for you has to do with Medicare. And that's when the Affordable Care Act was set up 11, 12 years ago now, there was a new hidden tax created, all right? It was saying that, hey, if your income is high in retirement, yeah, you can use Medicare, but you're going to have to pay more for Medicare. So everybody refers to it as IRMAA. It's an income-related Medicare adjustment, all right, saying that you're going to have to pay more in premiums. Well, there are thresholds for IRMAA too. And this is where we get to some really interesting planning. If now we're using in 2023, Medicare premiums will be determined from your 2021 tax return. So that's why we have 2021 tax year here. But let's say in 2021, my income was $193,999. Well, my Part B premium is $164.90 per month. But now let's take it up by $2. Now I'm $194,001. That's a really brutal tax, because just by taking out those $2 extra, I now have to pay an extra $65 per month for Part B and an extra $12 per month for Part D. So that's $77 per month, or just under $1,000 per year that I'm going to have to pay extra in Medicare premiums. All right. So really, when we get close to thresholds, that's where we as financial advisors kind of nerd out a little bit. We want to get very sensitive and say, hey, let's be careful. Let's make sure, while we were trying to be sensitive and say, take some from the IRA, take some from the taxable account, let's be careful about IRMAA thresholds as well, because we don't want to inadvertently trigger you $500 or $1,000 above these thresholds. Are there retirements in which you're going to have to pay Medicare IRMAA premiums? Yeah, you're going to have to if you want to live on some of these higher income amounts, but there's certainly planning to be done to get you below certain thresholds there. All right. And this requires advanced planning. Now, one of the things you might think is, well, wow, they're using my taxes from 2021 to determine what I'm paying in 2023. Yes, with an asterisk. If you plan things right and you are mindful of this, you can actually go to Medicare and say, I know you're using my 2021 income. That's back when I was a doctor. I'm not a doctor anymore. I'm now retired and my income's significantly lower. You can petition Medicare to actually lower your IRMAA, right? What they're considering as your gross income, to get potentially your premiums much lower. And that's something that an advisor can help you with as well. So hopefully today's presentation has helped you think about, it's not what you make, it's how much you keep. So you need to, yes, know your number of what your gross pay is going to be. You need to know what your taxes are going to be. You're going to need to know which side of your portfolio you're going to take income from. And you need to know what you need to live on retirement, and get that as honed as you can be. If there's one outcome that I'd have actually from today's call, it's that if you don't know what you think you're going to spend on a monthly basis in retirement, figure that out. It's the biggest number used for retirement planning, and one of the hardest ones for some people to come up with. But with a couple of hours and a few months of bank statements and a few months of credit card statements, you can come a long way towards getting very clear on what that number is going to need to be in retirement. After you know it, then we're getting into these nuances. How are we going to adjust for taxes? How are we going to get maximum possible return? The other thing to be mindful of throughout retirement is just do tax planning. And that is not tax preparation. Tax planning does not happen on April 1st. Tax planning happens on August 1st. It happens on November 1st. It happens with looking at the nuances of your year of income and deciding, all right, how much your tax is going to be? What can I do to shift income into the next year? What can I do to accelerate some deductions into the current year? And then what strategies should I be considering? We have clients that every year we're having conversations about, all right, how much should we do in a Roth conversion this year, for example? Or we as their advisor are looking at, hey, are there any losses that have occurred in your taxable investment accounts that we could harvest, leave you invested in the market, but pick a different investment enough that you can harvest a loss to use on your tax return this year? And try and get us to a place where we're paying as low taxes as possible, not just in the current year, but over the arc of retirement. Hopefully that's given you a few things to think about today. We have a few questions, so I want to be sure we take as much time as we can to answer those. Okay. There was a question here that might be good for you to answer, Bob. What is brokerage income? So, like what are we thinking of for brokerage income in that set of four ways of earning income in retirement?
Yeah, I think there's actually a couple of questions that seem to really hit around the nerve of taxes, whether it's income or IRMAA. So I'll try to explain a couple of them. Taxable income is things like interest from bonds and CDs that are going to count on your tax return, part-time work, IRA distributions, not Roth IRA, but traditional IRA and 401k distributions. And what some of us don't realize is most of the people on this call, I suspect, is that 85% of your Social Security income will be taxable. It's very hard to not have your Social Security income taxable. You have to be under a very low number. So you can get all that information into a program to say, where is that threshold? What bracket should I be using? I think one of the analogies I've thought of and heard about is you don't want to pay zero taxes today just to defer that into the future. It's like going to a gas station. If gas was $1 a gallon today, you wouldn't just fill it up halfway, right? You wouldn't fill your car up halfway. You'd probably call your neighbors and buy gas for them too, right? It's the same thing with tax brackets. If we can force more income today into these lower brackets with the idea of paying lower taxes later on, that's a win. So you have to look at your taxes not on a year by year basis, but trying to project those out over your entire retirement. I would also say when you do that, you're going to have potentially more income today, and people get nervous about what you described as IRMAA. So now they're fighting the dragon of, I have to pay more in this income related Medicare adjusted amount. Well, if you think that Medicare premiums are going down, I think you're mistaken as well. So it may make more sense to sort of fall on the sword today, pay more taxes today, a little bit higher in IRMAA, with the idea that over time, you'll be winning more than the IRS or Medicare. So that kind of answers a couple of those. There was one other one about how do I optimize this? Joel, you were talking about tax bracket and optimization. Sometimes we don't get that information until the year is over. Well, you actually can get that information before the year's over. Not all of it, but you can get pretty close. So you have to know where to look to find out what your interest and dividends are going to be for that particular year. So when doing these conversions, for many of us that are really trying to plan this really close to these different brackets, oftentimes we want to wait until the end of the year closer to November, December to make some of these decisions on zero capital gains harvesting, as you mentioned, or Roth conversions. So that kind of sweeps out and answers some of the questions that were in that chat.
There was one more that I want to cover that I think is a great one just for the group, because it is not something we touched on in depth today. The question is, does it make sense to collect Social Security benefits and work full time at age 66 or 67? Social Security planning is its own discipline that is very important to integrate into this. So what I'll tell you on just as a brief answer thumbnail on the call is you definitely don't want to claim Social Security before your full retirement age if you're still working. After your full retirement age, now you have latitude. Do you claim it at 67? Do you wait till age 70? You never want to wait beyond age 70, but a lot of that is going to depend on your unique family situation. How old is your spouse? How much Social Security are they going to be eligible for? What is your life expectancy? How many years are you going to continue working? What are you going to be planning on living on? Those are all questions we'll ask to get to the bottom of, should you be doing that or not? All right. So our team would love to connect with you and discuss your unique situation. Thank you all for being with us and have a wonderful day.
Thank you.